welcome. Thank you for joining us. First, if we could, we'd like to have a moment of silence to acknowledge our collective grieving and anger and our support of each other. Okay, thank you for joining us for Reading the City, Compton and the Literary Imagination. My name is Rosalind McGarry. I'm Creative Director of Sepia. We're an arts organization based here in Compton, California. Sepia is currently working in partnership with Mayor Asia Brown and other city leadership on our Compton Arts Project, which is a series of panels, workshops, and public art activations that center Compton and South LA artists and that seeks to highlight Compton's cultural impact. Reading the City is the first endeavor of the Compton Arts Project and the first of a series of roundtables featuring artists of different disciplines with connections to Compton and South LA. For more information about Sepia and to purchase books of the poets joining us here today, click the button below. Also, feel free to push the Ask a Question button below. We'll try to get the questions answered in the last 15 minutes or so of the program. Today, three powerful poets have joined us for a conversation about their work and their city. Robin Coste Lewis is the Poet Laureate of Los Angeles and writer in residence at the University of Southern California. Her poetry debut, Voyage of the Sable Venus, was honored with the 2015 National Book Award for Poetry, the first debut to win in poetry by an African American. Lewis is a Cave Canem Fellow, a Fellow of the Los Angeles Institute for the Humanities, and a Ford Foundation Art of Change Fellow. She received her MFA in Poetry from NYU, an MTS in Sanskrit and Comparative Religious Literature from Harvard University's Divinity School, and a PhD in Poetry and Visual Studies from USC. Currently, she is a writer in residence at USC. Lewis was born in Compton, California. Her family is from New Orleans. Born and raised in Compton, California, Amaud Jamaul Johnson is the author of three poetry collections, Imperial Liquor, Darktown Follies, and Red Summer. Educated at El Camino College, Howard University, and Cornell University, he is a former Wallace Stegner Fellow in Poetry at Stanford. Currently, he is the Halls Bascom Professor of English at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he directs the MFA program in creative writing. Jenise Miller is a Black Panamanian urban planner and writer from Compton and Watts. She is a Pushcart-nominated poet and Voices of Our Nation Arts alumna. She received her BA in Black Studies and Sociology from UC Santa Barbara and an MA in Urban Planning from UCLA. Miller is the author of poetry chapbook, The Boulevard, and has published work in KCET Artbound, Boom California, Cultural Weekly, Dryland Literary Journal, and the Acentos Review. She lives in Compton with her family, and she is co-producer of this event. You can find longer bios on our Instagram page at Sepia Collective. Thank you three for being here again. Jenise, would you like to start us off with a reading of some of your work?
Of course. It's an honor, of course, to be here representing Compton, the CPT, with all of you. So I'm going to start with a couple of poems. I'm going to read a couple of brief poems inspired by my experiences growing up here in Compton. The first one is after a poem by Nikki Giovanni called Knoxville, Tennessee. And that poem, she reflects on what summertime was for her growing up in the place that she grew up. And this poem is similar. It's after that poem, and it's called The Boulevard, Compton. I always liked summer best. Water balloon fights and getting wet under a garden hose. You could run with your bare feet on the cool, wet concrete and be sticky sweet from thrifty ice cream or an icy melting down your arm. And mommy's cooking platanos and rice and peas and chicken curry, listening to salsa and R&B. You could dry off in the sun, shining on the stone-studded steps, and eat lemon heads and now-laters and barbecue corn nuts and policies with a little bit of vinegar in it. until one by one, mamas call you all inside, and your names make the streetlights come on. Thank you. This next poem is called Dolphins, and a lot of folks, are familiar with Compton through its music. And this was inspired by a particular rapper that impressed me kind of a little bit more than some other folks. Dolphins. Yolanda Yo-Yo Whitaker whipped crimped blonde braids and bragged, "The earrings I wear are called dolphins." And I became bigger, bigger than my block, bigger than my neon green and black biker shorts that copped from the swap meet, where airbrush tees, corduroys, and rows and rows of gold were sold, like the dolphin earrings my father bought. 4 gold dolphins, connected 2 by 2 at the nose. And I was wrapped by these shining creatures, swimming toward each other, bouncing daily from the earlobes that foretold my skin tone from birth. And Yo-Yo grew like me from streets of gray and grace, and wrapped me golden, like dolphins, break the light above ocean waves, make surviving the deep look easy. That's it. Thank you.
I created a slideshow of the Watts Writers Workshop from the 60s for you all, but I don't know how to share my screen in this app, so it doesn't matter, but just know, follow me on Instagram, people, and I'm going to post the photographs that I brought to share with you all today, starting with the great Harlem Renaissance writer Arnold Bontemps, who people don't know, who he and Langston Hughes changed American literature. A lot of people don't know that he wasn't born in Watts, he was born in New Orleans, but he moved to Watts when he was 3 years old. And he lived in Watts for a couple of decades before he went to college. So I was going to start with Arnold Bontemps from the 20s and then go to the Watts Writers Project and show. I have pictures of Quincy Troupe's first anthology of the Watts Writers Workshop, which is extraordinary, and I have a PDF of his signature in one of the anthologies, and then the larger, more commercial anthology that they did. So follow me on Instagram. I'm Robin Coste Lewis, and I'll put them up there tonight with other things. Okay, so forget all that, but I am going to start with one of my favorite writers from LA, who was part of the Watts Writers Workshop, and that's Wanda Coleman. And here's a poem from her Dream Walk, number 7. I just want to bring all of our legacy of writers from Compton into the room, and we'll do it with this poem, I hope. Number 7 from Dream Walk. Fear drives you to tears and out of the house during arguments with mama for long walks on sweltering summer eves. The moths come, collect on grainy stucco porches, are hosed away at sunrise. You stare at the shaded windows, struggle to decipher the lives inside. Who are they? Do they see you out here watching? Won't some sympathetic someone invite you in for tea? Cars are being washed and turtle waxed by loving hands. Pre-teeners play dodgeball on vacant lots. The librarian admonishes you for staying so late and not having brought your card. Palms nod against the neon rainbow sky. The moths come, and the starlings, and the dragonflies. You know something important is going to happen to you. Hurry, you whisper. Please, hurry. Wanda Coleman, number 7 from Dream Walk. I'm going to read, isn't Wanda Coleman, that poem slays me. I'm going to read a poem called Red All Over. It's a list poem of riddles. So you're not supposed to understand it. Understanding is overrated anyway. Poetry is supposed to be experienced. I just lectured all day to my poetry students. I'm reading it because it's the title, Red All Over, is the answer to a question, a riddle that, I don't know about you all, but we were all asked, what's black and red and what's black and white and red all over? And people would say the newspaper. Both my parents were avid newspaper readers, and it wasn't until much later when my father had asked me that joke all my life, and I would be in bed with him in Compton, and both my parents had a newspaper, that I realized, it was the 1960s, and there was a lot of bloodshed in Compton by the LAPD, a lot of bloodshed. In fact, the reason why I wanted to show you guys the Quincy Troop Anthology is that it's dedicated to a young man who was shot at point blank range while he was kneeling on the ground by the LAPD in Watts in 1968. So, Red All Over, the reason why I really wanted to use that riddle, which seems so innocent as a joke, it's actually very tragic. It refers to all the blood by black people shed in Compton during the 60s when I was born. So it's riddles. If you guys want to talk about it later, we can. Red All Over. The politics of frogs, the musk of butterflies, elegies of cotton, the whiteness of flies, interruptions by snails, a lie's guarantee, the hope of succotash, a chorus of harmony, permission of the persimmon, observations by the spine, the pincushion's reassurance, the propaganda of a line, cackling from the Bible, orations by the dog, the mirror's steady rifle, the fig tree's scarlet log, ands and their derision, lending library in the eyes, patois agnosticism, the tongue's chainmail of why. Lady calling from the ocean, invisible man on the moon, Lindy hopping dead upon the ceiling in the living room, girl asleep in the avocado, the minstrelsy of the floor, and bickering birds of paradise picketing our fickle front door. And then I'll just read one more maybe. Yeah? No? A short one? Oh yeah. This is a new poem. It's currently out in Freeman's. I'm smiling because it's a true story that my parents told me one night we got drunk on New Year's Eve. High Fidelity, Los Angeles, 1960. It predates my birth. They fuck for hi-fi. A pie. Okay, wait, for the youngins. If you guys don't know what a hi-fi is, it's a console, like it's a huge piece of furniture, has fantastic sound that plays records. Okay, sorry. High Fidelity, Los Angeles, 1960. They fuck for a hi-fi. A pine console of photographic veneer inlaid with glittering plastic. That was the deal. When he got home, she had whined like a girl, always his signal, or was it hers, that she would be generous if he gave into the new electronic appliance she wanted. That's how stovetop toast became a toaster, how the icebox became a Frigidaire. As she goes to work on top of him, she's not thinking. Her body is a quad, a klipsch, or the H.H. Scott. Those are all names of hi-fis from the 60s. She's a claritone with a built-in electro voice speaker, and each button and knob, when tuned or pushed, adjust her sounds automatically. And the time it takes to exhaust him, she's narrowed it down. Either she wants the new Macintosh or a Magnavox because there's one down at the Goodwill, slightly used. It has a record changer that can play their 78s but still spin the new little 45s. She is sweating in her new slip, the one she got on her new peach-colored credit card downtown at Sears and Roebuck's. He's wearing his undershirt, one of many she pressed over the weekend with starch whisked quick from flour and water. He's done. She's proud. The boys sleep on the sofa bed in the living room. He lights 2 Pall Mall cigarettes, passes her the most lit. She takes a hit. I know which one I want, she says. He nuzzles his nose into her armpit. Which one what, he asks, and rolls over, chuckling. I'll stop there. Thank you.
All right. Well, hey, family. Hello, everyone. It's always good to be home, kind of in this way, right? We're trying to make it work the best we can. I dedicated this book, Imperial Liquor, to my parents, my mother, Eartha Rochelle Wilson, and my father, Craig Michael Johnson. When my father was a boy, he lived through the Watts riots. And when I was a teenager, I lived through the LA riots in '92. And now, our neighborhoods are burning, and I have to explain to my teenagers this history, and we keep having the same conversation. So I'll begin with this first poem, The Authority. Call it what it was, a Watts, or the brick's bright salvo against Reginald Denny's face. How triumphantly bloody now I remember it. The red truck, the driver's side door aimless as a slip toupee, or the flap of one's skull, or how Holmes, playboy, after he dropped him, seemed to high step, seemed to glad hand the air. We were talking about West Baltimore after dinner, about a boy who, at the behest of his mother for breaking some windshield, turned himself in. My son, our son, because we have gone hoarse for years trying to get him to listen, thinks, here's a story about obedience and redemption. And given the divine narcissism of childhood, where the juice-stained protagonist often emerges from an orchard only to confess, or the soldier returning, whose wounds vanish after his feet are washed with palm oil, or sweet, sweet Isaac, the bound body, and Abraham's stayed hand. Who wouldn't believe that God rewards? So this next poem, my parents were, when I was born, my parents were juniors in high school at Compton High. And, so we're like a proud Tar Babe family, right? Like kind of going way back. They met, Enterprise Junior High School and kind of kept the romance going on and off, through Compton. So I didn't really think about like Tar Babe as a mascot being like kind of complicated at all until I left Compton, and people said, the mascot is what? I was like, it's a Tar Babe. What's the problem? Right? The reason it's a Tar Babe is that Compton High School was built at the original location of Compton College. And Compton College's mascot was the Tartar, like a kind of like Viking, type figure, right? So when Compton High School took that spot, they became known as the Little Tartars, and then the Baby Tartars, and then the city got blacker, and then they became known as like the Tar Babes, right? So it's an incredible history. So this poem is in response to that. Tar Baby. Given that Tartarus stands undisputed as the very bottom of hell, where even the bones of the damned are scattered by Hector's dogs, and the Gorgons weep blood into its vein marble floor, then maybe our mascot is fitting. Noted for the venom, the Tartars too were a fallen people, hunted, then abandoned, and consumed again in the Gobi by the Golden Horde. So then maybe we honor them, the little Tartar, the scarred and wolfish, the vengeful. And who among us even remembers our white past, Fruit Town and the farms before the wig shops and gutted lots, Miss Compton's tinseled scepter, her bob, a motorcade of Impalas peeling the corner of Cocoa and South Oleander. So tonight at the stadium, the tar babe prances in his Columbia blue diaper, wielding a foam scimitar, a broken tooth winking like a searchlight through the wind. And those sticky mouth foxes, clustered in the stands with their Cracker Jacks, an expression stuck between grinning and crying, while they tug at the matted hair and tear the black from their paws. So 2 more poems. The whole Black Lives Matter thing goes back to Ida B. Wells and the Red Record and, anti-lynching legislation. But I really started to come into this conversation over the death of Latasha Harlins. So this next poem is in honor of her. She was a 15-year-old girl who was shot in the back of the head. This was a few weeks before the Rodney King video was released. Her murderer was found guilty, but then only sentenced to community service. How often I turn to Latasha Harlins, who would have been 45 this July. As if you have disturbed someone at dinner, but rather than leave, you traipse through their hallways and bedrooms, rifling through their closets and drawers, fingering the fine linen shirts and pocket squares, the bespectacled display case your breath. And naturally, they are too polite to say anything. So they just look, without looking, rehanging the same fucking blouse, unfolding, then folding a charcoal cardigan, which is so late season, which you probably wouldn't have purchased anyway. And I'm convinced they're convinced they think of themselves as good people, considering an apparent absence of sound, no ugliness, no sirens, no syrup or egg yolk marring some lunch counter. No one even contemplates the police, which warrants, I imagine, in their imaginations, a form of applause. My sons were gone too long. They are developing this habit of walking their allowance down to our corner store. One of the many ways I failed them, we haven't had that talk about their bodies, about the alarming rate of illiteracy surrounding their bodies. I'm ashamed of how much compassion I've shown our declared enemies, which is what I was given, always unzipping my jacket, attempting to speak before spoken to, being pleasant, thinking anyone is watching. And what they are waiting for is whatever I placed in my hand, which rarely feels like grace. So my last poem, the title is self-explanatory. When Police Chief Daryl Gates died, I kind of had this wave of emotions. I wanted to do a little dance, but it's hard to kind of piss on a man's grave. So I was really trying to process what that era represented. So I wrote this poem. LA Police Chief Daryl Gates, dead at 83. So the parents blame the children, and the children march barefoot through the alleys, spray painting their age. And the preacher introduced the word lascivious and accused the congregation of not tithing when the daughter died. And the deacon board smoked, and the economist saluted Reagan, and the police called it an economy of dust. Our meteorologist predicted a low pressure system in the abdomen, and junkies swore perfume wrung the air. Our grocer had his union. The butcher couldn't outrun his quarter of spoiled blood. The girls wore extra rings and caked their skin with Vaseline. The men slept the afternoon, growing childishly morose as they dreamed. And I think I thought we'd burn then. when the refinery blew and rust began to bleed through the whitewashed fence, when the lawns were done and the schoolyard darkened and the side streets began to split.
Absolutely beautiful. Thank all three of you, really. I'm just overwhelmed with you being here and us sharing this way. We're going to go into our question and answer portion. Jenise and I have some questions for you all. The first question is for the three of you. But what role did Compton play in your development as an artist? And also, were you aware of an artist community here? Did you feel alone in that way, or did you feel like you were part of something, knowing yourself as an artist? If you did know of yourself as an artist while you were here?
Well, being from Compton, I was surrounded by creativity. This is the early '80s. So in terms of dance and music and fashion, like it was all everywhere. I didn't really think about it at the time, but I came from a pretty artistic family. My uncle was a visual artist. He was really influenced by Charles White. So there were always these sketches in our house. My uncles also did woodwork. If you remember going to the swap meet and you had those Gemini mirrors where it was a wood backing with mirror hand paneling. They did a lot of those and kind of sold them at the African marketplace and the different swap meets. So there was always an artistic energy in our house. We never really talked about it. And I was also really invested in not necessarily poetry when I was growing up, but breakdancing and beatboxing. And I love clothes, and I used to walk out of the house in the craziest stuff, the MC Hammer pants and Puma, sweatsuits and Lacoste sportif stuff. And so everything was really bright, garish colors. And I think before, I thought anything about poetry, there was always this sense of representing the city and having a lot of pride, in Compton, not Long Beach, not LA. Those were different cities, right? It was really about representing, our city. So I think as an artist, that intimacy and the responsibility to, kind of connect with, people in the community was always there.
I don't know how Compton and being born, first of all, I was born in 1964. So a little bit before everyone else. And first of all, this is the best question I've ever been asked and no one's ever asked me. So first of all, thank you. I'm very emotional because it's the question. It's the question. So I was born in 1964 on Central Avenue in Alondra by the cemetery. And I have poems that I was going to read, but if there's time, maybe I'll read one or two later. Let's see. And everybody was Great Migration survivors and celebrants. Everyone. At the time when I was born, 1 out of 3 Black people in Los Angeles were from Louisiana. It's a huge diaspora. And the way that you have Vietnamese stores and Italian stores and all that around LA now, we had Louisiana fish markets, Louisiana grocery stores, all that stuff. And so I think that, I think it influenced deeply how I understood the post-colonial kind of moment in world literature and American literature. It helped me to push that. I definitely felt like everybody that was there were survivors. It was very clear because of all the assassinations that occurred in our childhood of MLK, RFK, JFK, you name it, Malcolm, all that was, I don't want to say it was normative, but it was quotidian. The same way they're continuing to kill Black men. They even killed like the most respected of our leaders, like they were pulling up poppies. But the flip side of that is that I can't think of a more beautiful way to grow up with those Southern migrants. I really can't. It was extraordinary. And when I think of Compton, the reason why I got so emotional is that just this ribbon of memories went through my mind. My sister pushing my blue metallic bicycle, teaching me how to ride. My father, you know, I don't know, playing hide and seek in the cemetery. We used to have this thing where they would make tents, like, you know, Compton's backyards, contrary to what how Compton is represented in the media. It's an extraordinary place of beauty. And our backyards are huge. Those little tiny houses actually have huge real estate behind them. And my parents would let us build tents, and there'd be like 10, 15 tents snaking through our backyard, and all the kids from the neighborhood would come over and we would sleep outside. I mean, it was just extraordinary. And so it's hard for me not to get emotional. That's the long story. But you asked an equally poignant question, and that was, did I have company, artistic company, aesthetic company? And the answer, I loved what you said earlier, Amaud, like, sure, aesthetically, I've never seen any higher art in my life, just the way that people lived, right? Just the way that they dressed, the way that they talked, the way that Louisiana Creole diction infiltrated English and made English a syntax bend. The way we said, you know, going to the store, no. You going to the store, yes. The way we fished for crawdad in the canals, things that you will never, ever see, ever. It was another country to me. It was gorgeous. And yet at some moment, I knew early on that I wanted to be a writer, single digits, I knew that. And of course, first of all, we won't even talk, thank you for talking about what a heinous oppressor and murderer and slaughterer Daryl Gates, who was the chief of the LAPD, was. My whole life, because of LAPD, was pure violence in terms of state terror. Gun, bullets, guns, shooting, helicopters, all of it. I remember when I was getting ready for this reading about the SNLA, how they were bombed and fired out their house because they had kidnapped Patty Hearst. You know, this is like what I remember when I think of Compton. My parents moved, it's where I'm talking to you from now, about 6 blocks away from the Compton border to a town called Gardena High Represent. And so it was Gardena for many years, but now it's considered Carson. And that's a whole other thing to talk about, right? Property lines and redlining and how we shift things. The first Black mayor of LA County was the mayor of Carson, Gil Smith, long before Tom Bradley came around, right? And I was young. And, you know, these kinds of conversations we don't get to have. So in any case, I ran away from home. I didn't run away. I informed my parents that I was leaving because I wanted to be a writer when I was 17. And I moved to New York. I saved all my money from working at Bullock's. It's so nice to be able to drop these words and everybody knows what I'm talking about. That never happens for me. So I worked at Bullock's in the laundry department and moved to New York. And I moved there because I didn't know that there were artists here. And so that reminds me, it's Ava DuVernay's birthday was on Monday. Let's all say happy birthday to Ava, please, you guys. She's at Ava at Twitter and Instagram. Please go wish her happy birthday. It wasn't until I met Ava, and that was a few years ago, did I know that there were Black artists from my generation, from Compton. I didn't know, and I have to tell you, I cried like a baby because the loneliness I felt, you know, was so profound. I know, someone's saying happy born day to Ava, that's right, and all the other brilliant artists from Compton. So I moved back east to try to find my tribe, and I did, and it was remarkable. But there was always something missing, and I didn't know until I moved home. And what was missing are you all, this conversation, this event. The moment I got your invite, I literally cried. I cried, you know. Wanda Coleman and the Watts Writers Project was all I knew. I didn't know. So I'm grateful. I'm talking on and on. But yeah, so it's profound. It's a profound question.
We're so grateful for you too. I share that. I discovered late how much, how deeply we needed an arts council was. Jenise?
Yeah.
Would you like to answer?
Okay. So for me, I mean, my influences with art in Compton, or how Compton influenced me as an artist. It introduced me to art, particularly Black art, Black artists. When I grew up in Compton, I grew up in like some apartments. And a lot of folks don't realize that Compton is actually predominantly homes, single family homes. And then it's farming area as well. And we grew up in some apartments, and it was definitely a community. And the community included, like, my family was from Panama, and there are a bunch of families from Panama, but then there were also families from the South, right? So Mississippi, Louisiana. And the folks who introduced me to like Langston Hughes and Gwendolyn Brooks were my teachers. And my teachers were, all very proud women from the South, probably went to HBCUs, who didn't play. They did not play. They didn't play when it came to education. They didn't play when it came to how you carried yourself. And so they made sure that we were aware of, Black history. I remember my middle school teacher gave us an assignment we had to do a report in which we wrote like a couple of paragraphs on prominent African Americans for every letter of the alphabet. And I was like, I don't, who? When GHI, who? I don't have no idea. I have no idea. And so I had to go to the Compton Library and ask for the Afro American Almanac. And there was this section of those books where it was just huge, thick books of who's who, prominent Black African Americans. And so it was my teachers and, the folks in my community. And I really, we had a lot of folks in our community, but I have to specifically give a shout out to like the women, the Black women in our community, the teachers, like my mother, the women who, pretty much I would say they kind of, they created a world for us. It was like this coalition of like Black women who were committed to keeping their children safe, and especially during that time. And they built this world for us where we felt safe, where we felt joy, despite what was going on in the outer world. And I shared with you, Rosalind, how I remember there being grass in the apartments where I grew up. And when I look at pictures, there was no grass, not one sprig of grass. But I remember there being grass. I remember there being flowers. There were no flowers in pictures. But I mean, that was the creativity too that I was exposed to, like what they did for us. And, they helped me to see the world a lot differently from what was actually going on. So that's all I'll say on that. Robin wants to say something. I'll mute myself.
I love that you saw flowers. I want to just say something about the differences in generation, because what you just said was so profound, Jenise, about having Black teachers. We didn't have any Black teachers. Our teachers beat us with rulers in their hands. They made us kneel down outside in the cold. I never saw a Black author from kindergarten until 12th grade, not ever. My AP English teacher, I wrote about this in an essay that is out in the world, but she asked me and the only other Black kid in AP English, I'm just saying, I want to talk about the differences in generations. I'm like, yes, right? That's amazing what you just said. When I was in school, girl, our parents gave us Black books. I have a poem about it actually called Frame. Our parents, yeah, somebody else is saying they didn't have any Black anything through K through 12 either. But in any case, there's a teacher at our high school, AP English, who when we had to recite a poem, and both times the two Black kids in AP English, even though the majority of Gardena was Black at the time, that says a lot about curriculum, right? They didn't let Black kids in AP English. She asked Cedric Wilson, I remember his name only because this incident was so traumatic, do you know how to tap dance, boy? Right? That's our high school. And then when I recited, do you like grits? Do you like watermelon? And it took me so long to figure out, that's one of the reasons why it took me so long to come to poetry. That was the last time I took a poetry class, was that class in high school. And it took me, I don't know, 30 more years to start writing poetry and even thinking about poetry in that way. So I just wanna, for the audience, say the reason why Jenise got to read those incredible books and have those incredible teachers was the activism of Black people during that time, starting in the 50s and the 60s, who so consciously said, we're gonna go to school, we're gonna get our teaching certificates, we're gonna start PhD programs in African American history, right? So you can get a PhD in African American history. And several people then went and came back to Compton and started teaching, or they stayed in Compton and kept teaching. And so those books that Jenise was just talking about, they didn't exist until the 60s and 70s, really the early 70s. So I just wanted to jump in for a minute and go, this is profound for me to hear this as someone who left Compton because my teacher was asking me if I liked watermelon and could I tap dance. Right? To hear that you had this other experience is so profound, and I'm so grateful. The other thing, wait, the flowers. Oh, the other art influence that was really big for me that I don't know if any of you guys had was every weekend, the guys with the congas would get in the intersections and play for hours, and the neighborhood would dance, and it was profound. Congas from, these are people from South North America, so from Louisiana, Alabama, blah, 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 right? As we call it, the North Caribbean. But anyway, every Saturday, people would play congas and dance. Another part that you don't see represented in the history. So Jenise, thank you for everything you just said. I'm so moved.
It's important too to talk about the significance of the Compton Christmas parade, and I was on a drum squad when I was a kid, and the drill team and drum squad and all of that practice, and then to be able to march down Compton Boulevard, Bullis, where you get, everybody's lining up and getting ready to go, and just everybody from the community coming out, celebrating children, and just the intimacy and beauty of the city, right? When people talk about from the outside, how bad Compton is, or all of the problems, Compton, and there's Compton changed profoundly, maybe every 5 years, right? My grandparents moved to Compton in the late 50s, coming from Texas, coming from Richmond and Rosenberg, and they were integrating the city, it was mostly a white working class community, and 5 years. There's profound turnover. Another 5 years, there's profound turnover. So by the time I'm coming of age, early 70s, late 70s, early 80s, it is, it is our Harlem, right? In the way that North Carolina and South Carolina created the Harlem Renaissance, you're talking about Texas and Louisiana, creating a new chocolate city, a concentration of creative energy in that space. So by the time I got to, I was a student at Enterprise Junior High School on the West Side. And, it was only Black. I thought middle-class Mexicans were white. I didn't see any white people at all, and so that that like intensity and beauty, really like created how I saw myself, like what kind of educational space, I wanted to be in. I mean, I went from, Howard, taking classes at, starting at El Camino, taking classes, going to Howard, going into an African American studies program, after that. And somehow I ended up living in Wisconsin. It's like profoundly different. I live in Atlanta, Oakland, so like this is a very different experience from my upbringing and education, but I carried Compton with me everywhere. All I've ever wanted was to make Compton proud because I understand that tradition.
You have done that. We're proud. We're so proud to claim all three of you. So proud. I know Jenise has a question for you.
Yeah, so going off of all of that, and because I wrote down a line from one of the poems that you read, Ahmad, "Who among us remembers?" And I feel like Compton is it's such a place of memory. Like memory is so important to this place, and even like all of the poems involve like memories. Um, and I'm just interested in like why is that? Why is memory so important to this place? And we're talking about too, like Compton does have like this larger single narrative that people mostly know it for. um and so like what part of that narrative is true and what part of it is like mythology, things mythology in terms of what um we or others hold on to. So I just talk more about like memory of this place memory.
I'll start with mythology, probably because like my teenage years were kind of the years of NWA, and I remember Easy E selling underground tapes out of he had a powder blue Suzuki Jeep, and before like anything got any like radio play, and and at that time, I mean, before NWA, there was a guy named Toddy T, who lived around the corner. He had this song called The Batarang, which felt like, it was like a narrative like from the community, because we just wanted to like, like give voice and make art, about like the things that were happening around us. But what's interesting, and I do really connect this to the NWA thing, like Compton became a commodity, like, like the way people thought about Compton outside of Compton, made people money, right? So t-shirts and hats. And then often like you would have people like as soon as they left Compton, then they would, act in ways that they never acted when they were in Compton, you know? So it's like all of a sudden it's like they would, people are like set tripping somewhere else, because they know people don't really understand what they're talking about. And so that like a kind of like minstrelsy or a kind of like performance of like the city that's totally disconnected from, the internal struggles and like the family heartbreak. Like, I mean, what is real is like the crack thing tore a lot of families apart. Like the things that happen to uncles and children and, people just like hanging outside the KFC or the McDonald's or the liquor store and like trying to negotiate, like things that happen to your friends that you couldn't feel like you could help. Like you just didn't know how to help them. So like there again, like a little 5 year window, maybe from like, 83, 84 to like 89. And, there was just this narrative of heartbreak that, that's real. That was real, that we just didn't know how to pull ourselves out of. So again, like there's some performance, like kind of gangster stuff. Like a lot of kids were just, they were bored and they got into, kind of knucklehead stuff. But then there were some really like hard and horrible things that obviously happened that people did to each other. But what never gets, communicated is the degree of like love and intimacy and investment. Like, I'm not from LA. LA is another city. Long Beach is another city. I'm from Long Beach people are different. No disrespect, right? They're like different people. LA people, I'm talking about black folks, right? Like black folks in LA, black folks in Long Beach are different. There's something about, as Robin pointed out, like that community history coming from Texas and Louisiana. And when people came, right? Some parts of LA, that history is much longer. Like you go back into the 20s and 30s. But for Watts and Compton, you're talking about, 40s, 50s, and 60s. There's just like a different kind of historical narrative. And there's also like baggage that kind of goes with that and a kind of pride. So I mean, that's kind of a long, answer to that question, but I'll turn it over to Robin.
I think our, oh, can you guys hear me? Yeah. I think our answers are so long because this conversation is so needed. It's so needed. I just want to point out that Compton's history of Black people actually goes back a few more decades in a serious way. And I also think that the reason why Compton feels so distinct in its culture, and I agree with you, I feel very different from people. I have friends up from all over LA. But yeah, there's a distinction. And I do think that distinction is that we're children of Southern migrants and Great Migration, a lot of us. Jenise, I can't wait to talk to you so much about Compton as a site for immigration from the diaspora. That's profound. I love what you said about the 5-year. What I loved about what you just said, Amaud, is about that Compton changes every 5 years profoundly. And I don't think people realize how profoundly that change actually is. It's so I just want to say that. I already forgot what the question was. I'm going to need that again. You could type it in the box if you want, and I'll come back to it. But I want to say, for me, I'm so happy that you said that it's like minstrelsy, the mythology of Compton. I can't tell you guys, I've lived all over the world. I also lived a lot of my life on the East Coast in New England and New York. And in parties, people go like, so where are you from? And I go, Compton. And they're like, what? Right? And I'm like, fuck you. Okay? You have no idea what I just said to you. You don't know. You will never know. You watch Boys in the Hood and you listen to some rap that's really bad rap, okay? Not Compton rap. And you think you know me. And you think you know Compton. And I find that I can't tell you how insulting the representations of how people play Compton in the media just makes me sick to my stomach. Because for me, it was a place of profound beauty. I love, Jenise, I will never forget that you saw flowers where there were none. I feel like I grew up in Oz. It was that magical. And not only that, but it was a black Oz. There was nobody there that was white, right? We didn't see white people. If a white person came to the door, we thought it was like somebody came from Mars. It was so bizarre. And it was just the most profound experience of beauty in my life, and bar none, bar nothing. What I do want to say, though, about gang violence is, again, I'm a little bit older by a decade or two. I don't know of the other participants, but when gang banging began, so I have a poem that I was going to read today that I didn't read called Math, and it's about my first love being shot and killed in a drive-by as gang banging was beginning. And the way that we thought about gang banging as it began was that, this is what I heard the old folks saying around me as more and more people, Black men, were being killed, was that they're imitating the cops, right? That's how we understood gang banging to be, that we had been shot at and terrorized by the state for so many years. I mean, you guys, we used to play hopscotch. I talk about this all the time. We used to play hopscotch with the shells from the LAPD's guns, right? All the time. And so that when gangbanging finally, and it's logical to me, it's logical, right? when gangbanging finally came around and my first boyfriend was killed and other people were killed and so many of our friends and family were killed, it felt like a continuation and an internalization of what we had already been experiencing. What role does memory play? Why is memory so important to this place? What is real, true? What is mythology? So I don't know how to answer that question. I don't. It's just, all I can tell you is I really feel, and I mean, people from Compton are proud. We are, right? Is it just me, you guys? We're really proud. There's a part of me that I just feel like you had to be there. I'm sorry for you if you were born somewhere else, but I was born at a particular time in a particular moment that was extraordinary, extraordinary. And I'll never recover from that beauty, never.
The complications of leadership, like in the city, like, I mean, Dollarhide and Dimely, I worked for, and some of it is like heartbreak too in terms of corruption. Like I worked for Walter Tucker's campaign when he ran for mayor and when he ran for Congress. I was like an intern, just before like those indictments like went down. And like I always say that the only reason I'm a poet is because I wasn't moral enough to be a preacher and I was too moral to be a politician. But I love the idea of being able to like talk to people, right? Like if you can make something really intense and engage people. And I learned that from being in that space, like community service, community leadership, right? Like, so how do you say something to create change? And there was all of that effort, I mean, there was a lot of failure. There was a lot of struggle, right? Like there were a lot of things that kind of descended on the city too, like people trying to be independent in a county that didn't want them to exist, so like that sense of like warfare is not gang warfare. It's like it's larger community struggle in terms of like identity and independence. Having your own fire department, police force, school district, all of these elements were attacked, right? Like were attacked. So like that struggle, was just about Compton trying to like maintain its identity, given like all of these forces constantly descending on us, right? So like that pride is real.
Jenise, you have another question before I ask all three of you for something. Uh-oh. Sorry, your mic was off.
Okay. I could ask another question. I see there, it looks like there's a question from the audience. Do you want me to ask the question or?
Um,
Oh,
yeah, there's one question from the audience. It's from Sinyan Kelly, and she says, the song about yo-yo and hip hop, what inspired you to write that song?
oh, well, so that question was for me. I didn't realize that. So, I mean, I think for me, like, I think going back to what I was saying just about like a lot of the women who were inspirational for me. I mean, and a lot of folks are familiar with NWA. I was younger, I think, when NWA came out, and like, I wasn't really impressed. And I know they had a role and a purpose. So, who impressed me more was like Yo Yo, and she was from Compton. Um, so, and also going back to, both Amaud and Robin were talking about like the art that we saw. So when I was growing up, like I mentioned, the biker short set was something, even like the roller set, so women who would put rollers in their hair, it was a coordination to it. I mean, it was the parting and the way it looked so neat. And then sometimes, someone their rollers would match their outfits. But like dolphin earrings, those were it. The dolphin earrings, like you had to get you some dolphin earrings. That was it. And so I got a pair of dolphin earrings. I got them for Christmas, and I have a sibling, and it was a problem because I got the dolphins and they didn't get the dolphins, and so because everybody wanted the dolphins. So yeah, that's what inspired that. Um, and so I can go. Do you want me to ask the last question? Kind of the conversation was kind of going there, but I know we're at like 6:06 as well.
I know we're at 6:06. Let me just say we can go on. We have time, but just to thank everyone for joining us. I know it is 6 o'clock, and this was expected to go until 6. But if you all are willing, I'm willing to hang on, and I have some things I want to know from you still. So everyone is welcome to hang out for a little while longer. There's another question that's come up from the audience for Robin. It says, Robin, you bring up food a lot in your poetry: succotash, hominy, persimmon, fig, avocado, cane, and more. How important is food to the bridge between the Great Migration, the Northern Caribbean, and Compton? And that's from B. Evie Marie.
Oh, B. Evie Marie. Can you guys hear me right now? Can you hear me? B. Evie Marie, wherever you are, I love you for this question. So I always joke that I'm a pastoral poet. That's a fancy poetic term, a poet that writes about nature, and that's trapped in a post-colonial body, right? So I have to write about being shot at by the fucking police when I'd rather be writing about the flowers that did not exist in my front yard that I saw anyway, Jenise, right? That's what I would rather be writing about. I'd rather be writing about the hummingbirds that fly all around. That's why, okay, so the last poem in my book starts off with hummingbirds. There's bougainvillea in my book. There's every kind of marker to say to the reader, you are by all accounts nowhere near the East Coast. You are also by all accounts nowhere near the South. You could only be in one place in America if you're paying attention, right? And that place is Southern California, more specifically Compton, and then Gardena, and then which became Carson, right? Yeah, somebody's writing Félicité. Yes, that poem. There are hummingbirds in it. That was so intentional. I was so ferociously determined not to be knee-jerk or lazy or anything and represent the flora and fauna of my childhood, right? As many flowers that I grew up with in Compton that could get in there, I put it in there. As many animals. Again, I know I'm dating myself, I'm proud of it. The Compton I grew up with, people had roosters in the backyard, horses, cows. They were, that's how we grew up. It was beautiful. I mean, now the the Compton black cowboys are getting a lot of attention right now. But even now, it's nothing to see. I just saw a woman riding down the street like a couple of weeks ago on her horse, right? Right on Avalon Boulevard, right? And that was so important to me to include in my work. It's like, no, I resist the Northeastern corridor or the East Coast centrism in Black literature. And I also resent the notion that I'm going to write about the South in a particular way as well, which is why I write about my family owning slaves in Louisiana. It's like, we are Black people, are so complex. Our cultures, plural, right, are so complex. It's just extraordinary. And so part of it is I'm just a nature hippie girl. I really am in a lot of ways. I was born in the 60s, That's the other thing. You don't talk about Black hippies. They were all over Compton when I was growing up, like Jimi Hendrix style was like boring compared to what I saw on the streets, right? And so all of that, I wanted that to be a part of my work. I always do, and I always want to use those markers to locate me in a particular geography and time in history. Thank you so much for your question. People just pretend like I didn't do that. Whenever I do readings or interviews, they're like, they don't even mention it. But it's a big part of the book in my work for me. Thank you. Oh, also, I'm happy to stay as long as you guys want. I put in the questions that this is heaven for me, so I'm not leaving until you guys want to leave.
Actually, you know what? I do want to ask this question. Jenise and I spoke about this. When I met you, Robin, I met you in Chicago. I don't know if you remember this, but um, at the time, this was 2016, and I was in Chicago courting Tracy D. Hall for an exhibition that I wanted a curator for in Chicago, and she said,
Oh my God, I totally remember now. I totally remember now. Okay,
Yes.
because when I saw you, I was like, I know her.
Let
Just
me
now,
tell
when I came in, I was like, I know her. Okay, go ahead, I'll shut up.
no. It's so funny because I can't. I called her. I caught up with her, and she said, "You know what? I have an artist. I have a poet's talk. Come and come to it, and then we'll talk afterwards." So I come and I sit down. It's you. You're reading. And your work blew me away. And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, dang, I don't have anything. I had nothing to write. I'm an artist, so I have a pen. I always have a Sharpie and I always have paper. I had nothing. I had nothing to write on, right? So I'm trying to write down. And and then um and then Tracy interviews you and she mentions that you are both from Compton. And I was like, what? I'm like, what is happening right now? So now I'm digging through, I'm looking up in my Discover card to see if I have enough money to buy your book, right? So I'm like, this whole thing happened. But one of the things that she said, I remember to this day, and I was talking to Jenise about it just recently. And I asked her, and I want to ask you three together. She mentioned a melancholy that kind of winds through the expressions of creatives from Compton. And I am not a writer. I'm an artist. I'm a painter. But I have to say, it's the first time I heard it said, and it was such a deep, resounding truth for me. And I wondered if you three could talk about this at all.
I have to go first because I'm like the farthest away. And I left Compton in '92, and like I still can't believe I've been gone this long. Like it was never, like I remember, going off to college, and my grandmother like kind of like broke down like in the carport because she kind of understood like what was going on, but I was just like, oh, I'll be back. And it just like, my life just like kept taking these turns. And I feel like a kind of the idea was like to go do something and like bring that back home, right? And so many different things happen, like really like some things that were like blessings, right? And some things that just like, like falling in love with a particular person and trying to make like a family work, or like, kind of like following a job, right? But like trying to figure out, every byline, every time like I'm introduced, the first line is born and raised in Compton, right? And the only like purpose was to try and like communicate like what comes out of Compton, like what's possible. And my grandfather owned and operated a laboratory. It's like the first Black man in the state to own and operate a clinical laboratory. Like we have deep roots, so much pride, and things that people just don't understand about like who Compton people are. And I feel like it's just like my life's work to represent the city. But that melancholy, my grandmother's there, my sister's there, my aunt and uncle, cousins, like is a place where, I'm the most loved, and most supported, and the place where I've also been like the most afraid. And that is like the great like conundrum of my life. Like I don't like know how to make my life work there. I like can't figure it out. Like how can I make my life work there? So like there's so much that's just about like trying to, and I'm in Wisconsin now, like people getting shot in the back, being like gunned down in the street here. So it's not like, it's that old DJ Quick song, right? Like just like Compton, right? Like San Antonio is just like Compton. Kenosha is just like Compton, right? Like, Compton is the kind of like struggles that we experienced there were not Compton struggles, they were American problems. So now that narrative is just catching up with the rest of the country. So like that melancholy is like, I feel like I want to fight the fight at home, but I'm fighting the fight somewhere else. So like, I feel really mixed about like, like where I'm directing my resources. So there's just like a kind of confusion and tearing spiritually, that just creates like a kind of sadness, and if it's melancholy, if it's sadness, or if it's like rage kind of bubbling down into something else. And I don't know what that is.
Am I here? Can you guys hear me? I can't hear me. Oh my God. First of all, of course, I remember you. We'll have cocktails virtually after this. All of us. Second of all, this conversation is blowing my mind. Third of all, of course, there's deep melancholy, deep, profound melancholy, which I consider an honor to suffer through. Shit. So there's this great Gwendolyn Brooks poem called Boy Breaking Glass. I hope I just mentioned it when I was talking about the beginning of gangbanging and my first boyfriend being killed by a drive-by. And my theory and others is that, we turned the knife in on ourselves. But my melancholy, it's really about the destructive tendencies of whiteness. And, the Great Migration is one of the largest. I think the first largest is the migration during the Indian Partition for Indian independence in 1947. I think the Great Migration might be the second largest in the world. It's huge. I got to check my numbers on that. It didn't happen for pleasure, right? I could talk forever about all the stories we heard about how they escaped Louisiana. My uncle was a waiter. I have a poem about this that's coming out in a few years. My uncle was a waiter in New Orleans, and he, because he had a thick Creole accent, said "Hoff." He was waiting on some white man in a restaurant in his white gloves, right? And he said "Hoff" instead of "half." And the customer said, "Nigger, who are you to say Hoff?" Right? And my uncle wasn't thinking, but said something appropriately back, but in that time meant that he was going to be killed, right? And so they immediately, when he walked back to the kitchen, whisked him to the train station in New Orleans, put him in the luggage car. Yeah, 1923. And that's how he came to California, right? I just don't think that, I think the Great Migration is one of the holiest things that ever happened for human beings, period. I think we have so much to learn from that migration from Black people in terms of human existence. That said, however, my parents were deeply melancholy for their home. It was so clear that they were not home. It was so clear. But because of their melancholy of place, right, they created this incredible mean, maybe that's what it's about, you guys. Maybe it's about the loss of safety and home that they created such a strong community. And my melancholy now is that I don't see that anywhere. I mean, I'm talking to you now from my mother's house in Carson, as I said, and partly while I'm here during the quarantine is the people say hello to you when you walk down the damn street. You know, I was living in Silver Lake where I would have to beg my neighbors to say hello. I would say hello, and they would stare at me, and I said, sir, I said hello. Hello, sir. I'm your neighbor. Can you say hello back to me? You know, and I started to feel so incredibly unsafe in these, you know, diverse hipster neighborhoods. I feel so safe here in Carson, right on the border of Compton. I'm so happy. If I don't say hello when I go walking or go for a drive, if you don't wave to everybody as you're driving by, they're going to call my mother, or they're going to tell my sister, your sister's so rude, right? Just the beauty of Black manners, the high style, the high politics of Black manners, right? That's what I'm melancholy for. For I was raised right, okay? I was raised so right. And I was raised so right by some extraordinary people, the same way Jenise is talking about her teachers and the Black women in her apartment building. Like, I was raised so well. And to now, you know, be spoken to like I'm a piece of shit by just anybody. Yeah, I clutch my pearls when I get cover letters that say, hey, yo, what's up? I'm like, delete. No, I'm not answering this letter. I'm not. I'm going to keep the bar this high because Black people have extraordinary manners, right? And that, you know, Hilton Alls had a great conversation with Toni Morrison about this. And I think it was a quote by Flannery O'Connor. I'm pretty sure it's Flannery O'Connor, who talks about Black men in the South, that manners was their boundary, right? That if they were well-mannered, nobody could infringe upon their dignity and their selfhood. And I think I feel that way about the Black culture that I grew up in. It's like I have to keep the bar really high, I have to toe the line. And my melancholy is about that, you know, we don't dress up anymore to take an airplane. Right? Remember back in the day, am I dating myself right now? Am I dating myself, right? Or, you know, we used to the people used to style. I mean, and partly it was that they were, you know, day laborers, janitors, whatever, some fucked up job nobody wanted when they got here, right? That they didn't have in Louisiana, and they would come home from these jobs, and everybody would change. It was amazing. It's kind of like I've heard of this phenomenon in Latino countries where in the evening people walk around the plaza, right? It was kind of like that on Central Avenue in the evenings in the 60s. People would change their clothes and then walk down the streets. And they were dressed to the nines. And it was exquisite. It was exquisite. And so what I'm melancholy for is that high Black style that was so normal. It was so normal, you know, that and that Black style also showed itself in the way we spoke with each other. And then when we weren't being high mannered and we were playing dominoes or tonk or, you know, whatever childhood games, then that down low language was as exquisite. And that's the stuff I'm melancholy. I think I'm just melancholy for Blackness, a particular kind of Blackness that I don't see as prominent anymore. And I resent so much. I can't tell you, this is where I'm like, ooh, you're becoming an old lady with a cane and a bun. Because I resent so much. I just get crazy that people expect me to respond to things that, for me, the way I grew up, is a complete and total insult. I can't stand it. So, you know, I think I'm melancholy for a particular form of Blackness that is high art.
I absolutely love that. You know, it's interesting. Both of you, Amaud and Robin, have said that your melancholy is about missing something. I'm really interested to see what Jenise says what your answer is.
Go off of that, really. I know when we talked about this melancholy, I was like, what's that concept of melancholy? And I think what connected it for me, in addition to what Ahmad and Robin just said, was I read this article by Rachel Coste Lewis, and it was about it was in the LA Review of Books, and so she was pretty much reviewing Kendrick Lamar's album as a text, and so she connects his album, his text, to the blues narrative, and so she talks about how his work is a blues narrative. And so in terms of melancholy, I think that made sense to me. Like I didn't grow up listening to the blues. Like, my mom, she played, salsa, merengue, calypso, soca. I was like a lot of Caribbean music, but I knew folks who grew up with the blues music. And my sense of it was, there's this feeling of I'm trying to do something, I'm trying to move forward or get ahead, but something keeps holding me back. Um, and I kind of feel that in terms of like Compton. I mean, just in terms of like the history that we've kind of like referred to in terms of it was this place of, blackness. You had black political leaders. You had all these folks that, and this is around the time of the 60s. And then once you get to the late 60s, and then you get rise of the black nationalist black power movement, and it's like, oh, there's this black city where black people are running things. I think that's a problem. And so, there are the stories and the documents that show that Compton was one of the places that was targeted, by the state, by the government. And it was like, and that's it. Like, you have this place that has all this promise and possibility, but there's something keeping us back. I think for me, that's a part of like the melancholy. Um, and then in terms of the missing, I agree with that as well, because where I grew up, it felt like a community, and like for me especially, like a lot of other Black Latinx folks that I meet in the Los Angeles area, they didn't actually grow up around other Black Afro Latinx folks, and I did. And I had that community, and I don't have that anymore. I don't have that sense of community. And so it's like I am missing that community that I had with the teachers. And like Robin said, like my teachers taught us manners in class. They came with the clip-on earrings and a brooch. I had one teacher who wore a brooch every day before I even knew what a brooch was. And then I found out from like watching a Home Shopping Network what it was. Like, oh, my teacher wears that. It's a brooch. Every day she wore a brooch and some pumps and stockings. And you cross your legs at your ankles and at your knees, and all these things that we were taught in school. And that community isn't there anymore. And what it required, it required some particular conditions for us to be able to have and experience that community. And where I live, like we were very interdependent, for instance. And I remember talking to someone like, oh, I want to raise my kids in a community like that. And, and they asked me questions. And what I realized is like, we were poor. We needed to be interdependent. Like borrowing a cup of sugar was like, I actually need to borrow a cup of sugar because I need that. And, that condition of us being poor allowed us to be interdependent. And I want a community like that, but I'm not necessarily in that same situation. So I definitely feel the melancholy and the blues, like on all those like different levels, particularly when it comes to a place like Compton.
Can I just jump in for a second? I'm so happy you mentioned everything you just said, Jenise, also resonates so deeply with me, and I'm so happy you mentioned the thing about interdependence and community. So I was raised, sounds like you guys were too, that interdependency was a beautiful thing, right? like being able to go to your neighbor and borrow a cup of sugar, that's a holy thing. That's a holy transaction, right? You know, there's all these history of ethnographies about gifting, right? The gift economies, you give, we give. That we've lost through assimilation, the economy of gifting, which is, right, how communities stay communities. You know, it's exactly what I was saying about greetings. A greeting, you know, in Sanskrit, the word for thank you is word gift, dhanyavad, a gift of a word, right? You say thank you, right? Like, I can't tell you now that I'm home. I'm so happy to be home. Can you guys tell? I'm so like, yes! I'm trying to figure out how I could just stay here, right? But, you know, just that thing that is happening, even in quarantine, like socially distanced, knocking on the door. Now it's text messaging. Girl, do you have some eggs? You know, or, you know, finally now people are a little bit less traumatized, even though we've lost. There's been so many deaths in my neighborhood, so many deaths in my family. But now people are a little bit like, okay, so now the old ladies are walking together again, socially distanced, 6 o'clock in the morning. Right? That's a beautiful thing. These are great migration survivors who have been walking together for decades, and they're out walking again. And to just listen to them, I just eavesdrop because my sister walks with them, just to listen to their, and as writers, you guys will all appreciate this, right? Just to listen to their diction, just to listen to the way they kiki a little bit. Oh, girl, and this one has a cane, and that one didn't bring her, wants to walk her cat. Can you believe that? Oh my God, right? Like, it's so exquisite. It's so exquisite. And there's something that happened, and you, Jenise, reminded me of it, is that when we became independent, I know for me, I'll speak for myself, assimilation, right? Part of it was just loneliness. I was in grad school like you. I got caught out there, right? I went to grad school at Harvard. Next thing you know, I'm living in New England for 13 years. What the actual hell was I doing? It was beautiful. I had a great job. I was Professor Robin Lewis, blah, blah, blah. It took me, I was so homesick. You know? And I didn't know it. I feel for you. I will talk to you every week. I will talk to you. I make that commitment, you know? And you're trying to represent Compton while you're like, you know, in 5 feet of snow. It's insane. With people thinking that you're going to pull out a Uzi and not gun them down when you come for your office hours because you say you're from Compton. I mean, the insanity of how people react to Compton on outside of the West Coast, inside too. Yeah. But I do think a part of it is that it's about how much we have grown to shame dependence, right? That we can't possibly be dependent upon each other. That's not the American way. That's not the great individual, read capitalist way, right? Whereas, you know, growing up, you guys, people would help each other buy their homes all the time. All the time. They would make these like little, you know, I forget what they call them, but basically, you know, they would help each other to buy the property that you're talking about, Jenise, right? People don't realize that Compton is really a city of primarily single family homes. They're small, they're gorgeous, you know? Anyway, I can go on forever. I'm going to shut up just in case anybody else wants to talk.
Jenise, you have another question? There's so much. I mean, there's so much.
Exactly.
You guys brought up maybe, I don't know, like it feels like suddenly we have 10 other topics that we've touched on that are a whole new Reading the City program. But I will say this before we go. Will you three consider the possibility of Sepia Collective including your work in some of our public projects as we move forward? I'd love to see some of your words on walls in the city, and you know, any other creative things we can do. So can we please keep in touch for that?
Of course, I'd be so honored.
Can come home and, you know, in a way, to Compton.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be honored.
It would be our honor too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even have like the words for that. Like the idea that like anything that like I've written would then be somewhere like in the city. That's just like Yeah,
Thank
of course. Yeah,
Thank you.
big
Yeah.
deal.
You know, one time I walked from my home, Central No Longer. I was visiting my parents, all the way downtown. It's not that far. It's like 13 miles. Once you do a New Yorker thing, it's easier to walk Manhattan in one day. It's a beautiful thing. Anyway, it was so extraordinary. And my goal was the Black Firemen's Department. You know that you guys know about this. You know, LA has such incredible Black history. So I'm writing this. I'm working on this project about the Black Firemen of LA. There's a Black Fire Station. It's still open. There's a museum now, right? And I wanted to walk from my house to the fire station, also on Central Avenue. And the thing that was so remarkable about it, and I'm saying this because of what you just asked us, is I also wanted there to be, the museum is on Central, Marianne. Yes, thank you. I also wanted there to be like signage, and Eric Dolphy lived here and Arna Bontemps lived here. That's why I wanted to be the poet laureate. That's when I was like, yes, I'll be the poet laureate. Then I didn't realize I needed millions of dollars to do the things I wanted to do, right? I wanted to put, my mother's job as a teenager was to walk Ray Charles. That was her job. Because, of course, nobody in the entertainment industry could live in Hollywood because of Jim Crow, right? So they all lived in what is now called insultingly South Central, fuck you, Los Angeles. Anyway, they all lived in Los Angeles, right? And then they would have to go to the studios to shoot their films, record their music, whatever. But they weren't allowed to sleep there. They were never allowed to sleep in Hollywood, right? And so my mother's job was to take Ray Charles for a walk every day, right? And she said she would go pick him up. And she was a kid at this time. She was like maybe 15, 14. She would go pick him up and then take him for a walk around the block. I have a poem about it. It's coming out. And then she would say that it would start off with one kid, and by the time they got around the whole circumference, it would be this mob of children walking with Ray Charles. Right? Ray Charles was blind, so he needed help walking. I mean, and yet you guys want the East, the Northeast centrism wants Black poets to write about, I was a poor Black child, right? It's like, you have no idea what went down here. You have no idea the incredible history that took place here. And that's what is just so profound for me. So yes, I will do anything you say, always, always, always.
Yeah, and I want to say too, like, I had a colleague, I mentioned to someone that I was from Compton, and he kind of looked at me and he was like, "Oh, well, you must have been from the nice part of Compton."
Oh my God.
And like, and that was so strange because, like, clearly, like, he was trying to fit me into like a box that was different from like the way he understood like the city. And
Yes.
like, I always want to tell people that, like, there wasn't anything, it's not like I was like a gifted child, like in some like pull-out program, like we're in like a magnet program or anything like that. I had a Jerry curl. I was like hanging out like every other kid. And there wasn't anything about my childhood, not one thing you could point to that would suggest that I would grow up to do any of the things that I did. There wasn't like one moment where you said like, oh, well, like that's one of those kids who would like go to Stanford. Nothing, right? So like these things that happen to our children, right? Like people don't know what we're capable of. They're constantly underestimating us and trying to put us in boxes because that makes it easier for them to destroy us, right? At the academic level, and just like our babies just kind of coming into themselves. So like anything is possible, like, I mean, I have, uncles and cousins that are also like a part of this community, and they know, right? Like there were so many days, so many nights where my narrative could have like gone in a completely different direction. It's like my life is like a series of like long shots, like long shot after long shot, like God was present like so many seconds of my life that like I can't even like do that math. So it is I I don't even know how to talk about it. Like there isn't like a poem that like I
Baby.
could write to create like a framework for the things that I've actually like seen and experienced. So it doesn't even make sense to me completely, right? So like I just have to kind of carry that and just like do whatever I can to try and, you know, just build community and like some kind of framework so we can always have this conversation so people understand what's possible in our children.
Yes. I just want to jump in. Extraordinary. And I hope you keep writing in that direction. I want to hear that poem one day. The myth of exceptionalism. I don't know about you two, the other writers on this panel, but I cannot tell you how often in interviews people try to say, well, what happened to you to make you become this thing, right? Because, and implied in that question is that I am somehow exceptional to the other Black people who raised me, first of all, second of all, with whom I grew up. And that myth of exceptionalism denies the genius that I saw every single day of my life in Compton, always. That's the part that pisses me off. It's like the only difference between me and whoever lived 3 doors down, right? And didn't get to go to Harvard or didn't get to whatever the hell stupid shit happened, which really feels, I agree, I identify so much with what you're saying, happened to me, right? Is that somehow it happened to me. This coach at this El Camino Junior College said this teacher said that. I just happened to be right here at this moment where somebody said, oh, maybe you can do this. But what I can't bear, and I can't bear it about Compton, but I can't bear it about any place, right? This idea that genius is rare, that talent is rare, right? I just don't buy that. I just don't. I think talent is a dime a dozen, and it's beaten out of us, and it's oppressed out of us, and it's taught out of us, right? But I remember the children I grew up with, and I was the dud. I was the dud, right? It's the people who aren't here talking, who were a hell of a lot more interesting than I will ever be. That's the part that just really disturbs me about Compton exceptionalism. We're not exceptional. If you had been, that's what I keep saying, you had to have been there. If you had been there, you would know. I don't want to sit here and romanticize Compton. I know bullshit went down in my own house, in everybody's house. I know bullshit went down like they do in all families. But what I refuse to succumb to is any idea that what took place there wasn't, and still takes place there, wasn't extraordinarily special, and history happening right before our very eyes. And I forget which one of you said, I think it was Jenise, that, you know, the history's there. Compton was targeted by the state and the country, you know, it was targeted.
Absolutely.
You know, what's that line? Who's that? We were never meant to survive. They were coming for us. You guys, that's what I wanted to say. And then I'll stop. That's what I want to say. I was never shot at by a Black person. And I was shot at, and there were bullets flying my whole life. And it was always the LAPD. So when people go, oh my God, you're from Compton, I'm like, bitch, yes. And I know how to run from a police's bullet really well. That's what being from Compton means to me. It means being the object of profound state terror for generations. So don't talk to me about Black gun violence and all that. I'm like, sure, that happened. At a certain point, that began to happen. And until that point, let me tell you where they learned how to shoot. Let me explain it for you, right? Let me tell you how the front of our house was riddled with bullets. Let me tell you about how the cops used to drive down our streets with their rifles resting on their windows in slow motion, 5 miles per hour, to intimidate us while we were playing hopscotch, jump rope, double dutch, right? We're children, and here comes the cruiser, the LAPD cruiser, in slow motion with their guns pointed right at our bodies. So this whole thing about we're like some exceptional talent, no, we're not. And I just don't buy it. I think all Black children are exceptional, every last single one. And given the right exposure, the right opportunities, Heaven forbid you give us some good ass teachers. My teachers tortured me, you know? You will have 8,000,000 of Black children, just like all the other Black talent that you admire. It's not rare. Black people are fierce. It's not rare. I'm sorry. Black culture is amazing. Sorry to go off on a rant, but I just don't believe in exceptionalism.
I loved your rant. I loved your rant. I'm full. I am full.
Me
My
too.
heart is full. My soul is full. Jenise? Wait, I'm sorry. You were muted. Say again.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna ask the question because I was like, okay, I didn't want to, make it go longer. But I'm gonna go ahead and ask, just because of what they touched on made me think about this, and want to ask this question about like so the Compton's narrative, and I'm interested in what you all think about what does it take or what will it take to for additional narratives or other narratives to be told, about Compton. Because there does seem to be always like that single narrative. And I think actually exceptionalism is the counter narrative. So it's these two narratives like, oh, all these problems. And the counter narrative is like, still I rise. I went through all these problems and I made it out, and that's it. And and it's interesting to me because I feel like Compton, like as a setting, just as a setting would be interesting. And I know there are authors who have written about Compton or used Compton as a setting, like Paul Beatty and Walter Mosley. But I'm so surprised that Compton as a place is just so interesting and well known, isn't a setting in more like whether it be fictional pieces or just I'm even thinking like horror movies that you could set in a place like Compton just because of so much that has happened here. Um, so my question is like, what will it take, or what do you all think it takes to open it up, for more narratives other than this one single narrative?
One who set two of her films in Compton, and and then she has another film that's so beautiful, and I'm tired, so I can't remember the title. Oh God, the one about the character who goes to take care of her aunt, and I think that it's located in Long Beach. And those are very conscious decisions, The only thing I can say is, again, that's why I use the markers in my work to say we are only in this place. I think it's happening slowly. Unfortunately, it's happening through gentrification first, right? That's the sad part, right? The houses around Watts, some of them are going for $500,000 right now. And I remember, Jamal won't tell you, because if you don't even want to know. I saw a news story a couple of years ago on the local news here, and it was like, they were all talking about like, and it's near the train, Watts, and it's near the train, and I mean, they were selling Watts to gentrification, right? So I actually, that's what I'm concerned about. I want to like somehow do something to stop that wave because it's happening. I don't know how to answer your question, Jenise. I just think we keep doing what we're doing, and we hope others will follow. I know, if you guys don't mind, I would love to announce a project I'm working on with LACMA. I'm doing a Truth and Reconciliation Commission through poetry. And I got a grant from the Mellon Foundation and the Academy of American Poets, and I'm partnering with LACMA. And it was supposed to be in person at the new Watts Towers Art Center in October. But because of COVID, we're moving it to the spring, and I'm going to be announcing all the things we're going to be doing, and we're going to do some of the stuff online for the next 3 months. We're basically mimicking South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission using poetry. Your poetry will be featured, trust me, just to talk about all of these issues. But as far as moving Compton, having other people realize that the Compton is the center of the world is how I would prefer to reframe that question. I kind of don't want them to know now, because it's kind of like what happened with Juneteenth, right? The moment everybody realized that Juneteenth was a thing, I was joking with friends. I was like, Hallmark is already printing the cards. By June 20th, the cards will be in CVS, right? So I'm a little bit afraid of what happens when we get found out. I used to be like, yes, Black people, if only you knew about our culture. And now there's something about American capitalism that knowing about our culture means selling our culture. And I think that, Amaud, you were kind of touching on that when you were talking about the different representations of Compton in the media, right?
I mean, part of what we're always like fighting for is, intimacy, right? Like who are we speaking to, and like who's listening, right? Like what makes Toni Morrison's work so incredible is like she had a clear sense of audience and like accountability, like within that community. So like she was always trying to bring out like so many like layers of beauty and complication, based on like what she understood from like how she grew up. And she was always like very aware of who she was speaking to. Now, she knew that other people were listening, but she didn't care about them, right? She was trying to lift up the people she was invested in the most. Now Compton is the hub city, right? Like it is the center, right? It's always been the center, right? They always thought about Compton as being the place that you kind of began, right? Like Compton is over 125 years old. Wasn't it founded like what 1890s, right?
Yeah, late
So,
19th century for sure.
So like we're not talking about a place that has like a recent history. It is at the heart of like you look at that map. Compton is in the middle of everything, right? But it's this. It's like the it's the eye of the hurricane in terms of like devastation in America. People don't know how to deal with what they created. So now we have all of this destruction, but that destruction goes back to the kind of decisions that were made in places like Watts and Compton. So I feel like going forward, there is a great reckoning ahead for this country. Like we are, entering a period of like another, reconstruction, right? The reconstruction period after the Civil War, the reconstruction, period of the Great Depression. And, like this problem right now is not going to go away. And because Black bodies are at the center of that, all of the decisions that have been made, food insecurity, the narrative of like violence, mental health, all of these things are visible and have to be dealt with. So until we talk about the things that have happened in Compton in a real way, and not like, oh, well, like Black people are like hurting people, and like why can't they get their act together? But the systemic problems that have created like what we think of Compton as being, when we have a real conversation about that, then I think we can have a real conversation about the direction of this country. Like Compton is American city, right? Like what happens in Compton's success is the health of this country. So that's all I have to say about that.